Welcome back to Early Morning. I'm Mitch Carr. Let's head over to the Hill for some of the top stories going on today in the country. That's right, the news takes no breaks. It might be the 4th of July, but we're still talking about politics. And to do that, we've got Niall Stanage here from the Hill. We're talking about former President, Donald Trump, and how he may be throwing his hat in the ring for a 2024 run. And so with that, we're going to go, like I said, to Niall, and we've got Kurt Bardella, a former GOP staffer. He says Trump is likely to announce a 2024 presidential run in order to take potential attention away from the January 6th hearings and some of the bad headlines for him that have been coming around. So, Niall, what do you think about that, about the idea that he might announce a run and about the timing of it?
I think it's very plausible that he might announce a run. The New York Times, among other places, has been reporting on that. And I think there are a number of reasons. Now, obviously, the one that you alluded to, Mitch, the timing and the amount of attention being given to the January the 6th committee is part of that picture. There has also been increasing speculation, as you know, that the former president could perhaps face criminal charges as a result of that committee. And then on the purely political side, you have rivals who appear to be gaining steam. I'm thinking there of people like Florida Governor Ron DeSantis in particular, challenging the former president's primacy within the Republican Party.
And Niall, we talked on Friday with one of your colleagues about DeSantis and how Trump said, well, I'd consider him as a running mate. And I asked her, Emily Brooks, about why anyone would want to be Trump's running mate and potentially his vice president. Has anyone seen what happened to Mike Pence? I'm not sure DeSantis is looking to be Trump's running mate, but what do you think of that?
It's not a particularly envious position in many ways. I mean, for a start, every president or every presidential contender overshadows their vice presidential contender. But that process or that dynamic is taken to the millionth level under former President Trump. Mike Pence had given him very loyal service for 4 years, and we all saw and heard about what happened on January the 6th. Even as new details continue to emerge. I also don't think, frankly, that Ron DeSantis has any desire to be anybody's vice president. I mean, Governor DeSantis is an ambitious politician, clearly. He's the governor of a very large state. He has a following all of his own. So if Governor DeSantis were to get into the race, he wouldn't be competing for second place. He'd be in it to win it.
Well, and along those lines, Trump, as we know, has a very strong personality. And as a matter of fact, Bardella, who we mentioned earlier, was quoted as saying, and this is a quote, this is not coming from me, that Trump has the impulse control of a freaking toddler. So would he be the GOP favorite, or would DeSantis be somebody that could usurp him?
Right now, Donald Trump is still clearly the GOP favorite. I mean, when that question is put into opinion polls, he has a significant lead almost all the time over DeSantis, who's typically in second. Now, there was a poll very recently in New Hampshire, obviously a pivotal primary state, that had DeSantis and Trump in a de facto dead heat. So I think that sort of thing would play on Trump's mind. But if the question is simply who is the favorite to win the Republican nomination, that's still Donald Trump if he wants it.
And the Republicans, they love to get on Joe Biden for how old he is. But if Trump runs in 2024, he'll be 78 then. So do they have any concerns about their own man being too old to hold this post?
I'm not sure that they have concerns about his age in particular. When it comes to the former president, there are, frankly, so many other things to be concerned about if you're a Republican. I mean, you mentioned his impetuosity, the controversies that he always brings in his wake, never mind something as grave as January the 6th and his role in it. Remember, we are talking about the first president in American history to be impeached on 2 occasions. Selecting someone like that as your future nominee is high risk by anybody's standards, but he is still viewed favorably by the vast majority of Republican voters and still has a serious emotional resonance or emotional hold over that constituency.
All right, so Trump is still kind of the main piece of interest for 2024, at least at this time. But Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, is going to be running ads in Florida starting today, sort of taking on Ron DeSantis. I find that to be an interesting subplot for 2024, Newsom versus DeSantis, and neither one of them may actually be running for president. So what are these California ads in Florida all about?
they're, to my mind, about Gavin Newsom putting his name in the frame for a national contest in the future. There is an issue with President Biden's very low approval ratings, combined with the fact that there are certainly mutterings in the Democratic Party as to whether he should run for a second term or not. What I think we're seeing right now, Mitch, is a number of people who would be in contention if President Biden did not run for that second term. And they want to keep their names to the fore, be considered, keep reminding voters that they're there. We've seen Governor Gretchen Whitmer from Michigan do a similar thing in a different way recently. So this decision by Governor Newsom to run these ads in Florida and to kind of pick a fight with Ron DeSantis, I think that's clearly an attention-seeking move, but you know, that's what politicians do when they're considering presidential runs or any other kind of runs.
That is what they do. Imagine Gavin Newsom faces a recall in his own state, and now he's thinking about a national run and running for president. Wish we could talk more, but Niall, Stanage, we have to leave it there. Thank you for your time.